Welcome to the NCDWI Guide podcast, where defenders of the Constitution assemble to prepare for courtroom battle and firm owners gather to develop marketing strategies that will revolutionize the practice of criminal defense. Here's your host, the NCDWI guy, Jake Minnick.
Hello, fellow freedom fighters, and welcome to episode 233 of the NCDWI Guy podcast. On today's episode, we are continuing our four-part endurance series. This is, again, kind of like a semi-five-part endurance series. It's named four parts, but back on episode 230, we talked about quelling the storm, how to respond in difficult moments. And since that time, we've begun a four-part endurance series. Back on episode 231, we talked about enduring hard situations and circumstances, kind of particularly focusing on Hurricane Helene and the unbelievable damage and destruction caused by Helene in Western North Carolina, and how to deal with difficult situations, circumstances, tragedies that come up in our life. On episode 232, we talked about how to become a better endurance professional by studying tough people and the power of really becoming a student of suffering. Today, we are going to talk about doing hard things. And we're going to talk about practice, the practice of hard situations and circumstances, and how that then can translate into becoming a better endurance professional. I'm going to talk specifically about my experience at the Grindstone 100. I am super pumped about this episode. This is going to be a fun one, and we'll get more into that in a moment. And then finally, next week, wrapping up our four-part endurance series, we're going to talk about being part of a resilient community and how the culture, the people around you, can really have an enormous impact on becoming a better endurance professional. So this week's episode 233, we're talking about doing hard things, and particularly focusing on my recent experience at the Grindstone 100. These kind of race recaps have been some of the most fun personal episodes for me to do, kind of applying the lessons learned during a endurance event to business and to life, taking these lessons that are learned over the course of marathon mileage or ultramarathon mileage, and figuring out what are some of the lessons that are applicable in these tough and trying circumstances, and how do they translate into life. So we're going to talk through that here on today's episode. I've done a number of race recaps in the past, so if you haven't listened to those and you enjoyed today's episode, go back and listen to the other race episodes that I've done on other endurance events. So back on episode 101, I reflected on the Asheville Marathon that I did, and did an episode called The Marathon of Business, and basically took 10 lessons away from that. On episode 139, I did a episode titled The Ultramarathon of Business, reflecting on the Daytona 100, 10 lessons that are applicable to business and life from the Daytona 100. On episode number 161, I did mental aid stations and kind of reflected on being a volunteer at the Hellbender 100 with my son Manuel, and 10 lessons that I took away from being a volunteer at that were applicable to business and or life. And then back on episode 190, I did 10 life lessons from the Beast of the East 100 that I did down on Kings Mountain in Gastonia last December. Today I'm reflecting on the Grindstone 100. Experience the Grindstone 100 is a 105-mile race through the beautiful Shenandoah Mountains and Valley, up in Virginia, just outside of Stanton, Virginia, and Bridgewater, Virginia. Just an amazingly beautiful area. Starts out kind of running through some of the beautiful farm country of Virginia, and then very quickly you're in the heart of the mountains of the Shenandoah Valley, and just gorgeous landscape, gorgeous place to both visit and be running. So I'm going to give you 10 lessons that I took away that are applicable to business and life. And there may or may not be, but is a bonus. Number 11 takeaway. That's kind of been the way that I've done these past 4 episodes that I've done on running reflections. And so this one also will have a bonus 11th takeaway. But just hitting it right from the outset. Here's lesson number 1. The hardest thing that's ever happened to you is the hardest thing that's ever happened to you. This was a quote, and I don't know where Joe Rogan got this, but this was a quote that I heard on a Joe Rogan episode that I listened to a few months back, and he just put it that way. The hardest thing that's ever happened to you is the hardest thing that's ever happened to you. And the reason that we're talking about this, the reason that this is this do hard things, if you want to become good at tough situations, a leader that is resilient in the face of adversity, a person that is capable of accomplishing big things, a person that is capable of going through difficult challenges, a person that is able to rise up in moments of tragedy, in moments of the shit hitting the fan, as we kind of talked about on the last episode, then you've got to constantly elevate what the hardest thing that you've ever faced is. If the hardest thing that you have ever faced is, McDonald's is out of fries, and you've gone through the drive-through, and McDonald's, believe it or not, is out of fries. I remember once I went to A&W, which is basically like a fast food place. I don't know where they're located, but this one was in Charlotte. And A&W is a fast food place, but it's built out of A&W root beer. Like literally, this is what they're famous for. And my wife and I went to A&W early after we had got married to go get a couple of root beer floats. It was the Applebee's on a date night moment, if you want to kind of compare it to the recent hit song. We got to go treat ourselves to an A&W root beer, and we pulled up, went into A&W because we're going to do the date night reel. We're actually going to go into the fast food place, not just drive through. Like, this is a sit down moment when we're having this root beer float, and went up to order our A&W root beers. And the fella across the counter said, "I'm sorry, we're out of root beer." And I literally laughed out loud because I thought he was joking. Like, this literally was A&W, restaurant. They are named this because of their root beer. Like, if there's one specific soft drink that they should not be out of, it's root beer. He was like, "I'm not kidding. Like, we don't have any root beer." And so, like, awkwardly, I was like, "Oh, I don't really know what else to say," because that was literally the whole reason that we came to A&W, was to get the root beer. So I think we just walked out because, like, I mean, it wasn't mad. I was just like honestly shocked. But it's like, all right, well, I guess we're just gonna go get a different treat somewhere else. And again, I wasn't really that mad about that situation. But if the hardest thing is in your life that you walked into A&W and they don't have root beer, then that's the hardest thing that you've ever faced. If the hardest thing you've ever faced is that your, you know, parent or sibling or best friend has died from cancer or from disease or from whatever it might be, car accident, then that's the hardest thing that you've ever faced. If the hardest thing that you've ever faced is that you got laid off from a job, that you've got, uh, uh, very sick and been out of work for a month, if the hardest thing that you've ever faced is that you had to file bankruptcy, if the hardest thing that you've ever faced is that you got sued, if the hardest thing that you've ever faced was an extremely challenging case, um, something you have a client that's faced with murder and you're responsible for handling that case, then that's the hardest thing that's ever happened to you. The hardest thing that's ever happened to you is that you've got a client that's faced with a speeding ticket and you have no idea how you're going to handle this first speeding ticket case that you've got. Then that's the hardest thing that's ever happened to you. Whatever the hardest thing that's ever happened to you is, that's the hardest thing that's ever happened to you. And what Joe Rogan, I think, was talking about in the context of this quote was that we have to figure out ways to be prepared for difficult situations by putting ourselves in a space of uncomfortability, a place of discomfort. I don't even know if uncomfortability is a word. I've just made that up, I'm pretty sure. So you should not look that up in the dictionary because I'm pretty sure it doesn't exist. You have to put yourself in a place of discomfort. How can you prepare for the death of a loved one, your business on the brink of bankruptcy, the COVID pandemic, Hurricane Helene? The list goes on and on. How can you prepare for yourself for that? By, as David Goggins would say, callousing the mind. Callousing the mind. You have to harden your mind. You have to prepare for situations of tragedy, of serious setback, of despair by callousing the mind. And when you do that, you can put difficult circumstances into perspective. So, in terms of thinking about like why I'm doing this 100-mile run, I think that one thing that excites me about 100-mile runs is that they are tough, that they are challenging. And I think most people see them that way. I can remember telling one of our foster kids' parents that I was running in a race. This is a couple years back, and very nice guy, just super sweet country guy, and really really fun person to talk to. And so he and I were chatting about this, and he said, "Oh, what are you doing? Like a 5K?" And I said, "It's going to be a 100-mile run down in Florida." And I could literally see the kind of like processing of his brain trying to figure, like he didn't like kind of say, "Wow, that's a lot of miles," or what are you, crazy? He was just like literally said almost to himself, verbally, but he almost said it to himself. He's like, "Man, that is a lot of miles." But he wasn't talking to me when he said that. He was just like, "That is a lot of miles." And it is a lot of miles, and I think that's one thing that attracts me to the ultra marathon distance, or the 100-mile distance in particular, is it's like, that's a lot of miles. That is a long way to go. But now, having done it a couple of times, I think I'm kind of able to put it in its proper perspective of 100-mile race is tough, but it is certainly not the most difficult thing that I've ever had to do in my life. I lost my mom when I was 18 years old, 19 years old, 18. Lost my mom when I was 18 years old. My wife and I have been through multiple stillbirths and miscarriages, and we have been through loss as foster parents when kids have had to go to other family placements. There have been a lot of pretty tough things that I think that I've gone through in my life. And running a 100-mile race, as tough as it might sound and as tough as there are moments in the race, it is something that's over in 25 hours on this particular race. The Grindstone 100, I finished in 25 hours, 20 some odd minutes. The last two races have been at 24 hours and 20 hours. So, basically 20 to 25 hours has been the time frame for the 100-mile race. The cutoff time for the Grindstone 100 was 36 hours. It started at 6 p.m. on Friday night, September 20th, and it ended on Sunday morning, the 22nd. So no matter how tough this race is going to be, there is a definitive end time to the suffering. And a lot of things, especially with loss, a lot of things when it comes to like a case that's coming up for trial, a lot of things are not that easy in terms of just they have a definite end time. And so I think, again, having gone through a couple of these races in the past, the hardness factor changed in terms of it wasn't the first time I was running a 100-mile race. And so the kind of adventure of the first 100-miler in Daytona, as well as the anxiety, was different with this race. I really felt like I'm going to finish this race, whereas with the first one in Daytona, had no idea. Having done it a couple of times, it's like the hardest thing that's ever happened to you is the hardest thing that's ever happened to you. Been through another trail race with a lot of elevation gain in Gastonia 10 months back. So it's like, okay, I've already done this particular type of a ultra event, trail race with a lot of elevation gain. So I think that helped put things in perspective. There was also some other things in life that helped me put things in perspective outside of just losses that we had gone through. I recently had read the endurance book that we talked about on episode 232. I really enjoyed that episode as well. That was a fun one for me to do because that was just such a life-changing book. But thinking about Shackleton's 18-month plus journey through starvation and freezing conditions, his entire team struggling with frostbite and being at the point of starvation, being lost, being, totally at the mercy of chance when it came to the way that the winds were moving, believing that they were going to die at multiple moments. All of these men struggling with a very frequent confrontation of likely we're kind of at the brink of the end here. Obviously they had to hold on to hope because that's what kept them moving forward and kept them focused. But I know that all of them struggled with despair in those 18 months where it's like, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to come out of this. And I never felt that way on this 100-mile distance. And again, like having recently read that book, it's like me running up a couple of mountains and back down again over the course of a 24-hour period doesn't feel the same as after going through an insane 18-month journey back to civilization over icebergs in rowboats through the stormiest seas on planet Earth. And then ultimately, literally going alpine mode and hiking over glaciers that were much higher than the mountains that I was going up and down in the frozen weather without any good gear, with no fuel, no aid stations. It's like if these dudes can do this after having basically been at the point of starvation and freezing to death multiple times, again, running up and down a few mountains, it's not that bad. Put your difficult circumstances into perspective. What's the hardest thing that a human can do? Well, that's the hardest thing that a human can do, right? And as much as a 100-mile endurance race is tough, it pales in comparison to Shackleton's journey and circumstances. And then I started thinking about things that my family had gone through. My wife, several years back, battled cancer. My kids, I'm not going to get too deep into this, but a number of them have learning disabilities that they're having to struggle with, past experiences that they were having to struggle with. And I was thinking through all of these battles that my wife and children have engaged in. And again, going up and down mountains over the course of a few days kind of just paled in comparison, really not a course of a few days, a day, paled in comparison to the real struggles and challenges and difficulties that they were battling. And it was inspiring to think of the way that my family, my wife, and my children had battled through these recent adverse circumstances. Me going up and down these mountains wasn't something that I was forced into, like my wife's battle with cancer and like my kids, uh, some of their struggles is not something that they asked for or signed up for. This was a cross that was put on them, and they're battling through that. This is something that I signed up for. Shackleton and his men, they signed up to go and do this difficult journey across Antarctica, but they didn't sign up to have their boat stuck in the middle of an iceberg and smashed to pieces and then have to hike across basically sheets of ice, row into the middle of the, again, most dangerous waters on planet Earth, freezing the whole time without any steady food supply. This is not what they signed up for. This wasn't something that they volunteered for. And so, again, I think putting all of this into perspective is healthy and helpful. And it's why this point number one is why it's important to do hard things, because there's gonna be stuff that comes your way that you don't sign up for. If you are not practicing hard things, then the hard things are coming regardless. Whether you volunteer for something hard in your life or not, the hard time is coming. The shit is going to hit the fan at some point. And if you haven't practiced hardness, if you haven't, as Goggins would say, tried to callous your mind, then you are in for a world of hurt. And that's why I think doing hard things is so important. So, point number one, the hardest thing that's ever happened to you is the hardest thing that's ever happened to you. As Goggins would say, stay hard by putting yourself in difficult situations so that whatever that next hardest thing that's going to happen to you is, you'll be better prepared to deal with it because you've practiced hardness. You've calloused your mind. So, number one, the hardest thing that's ever happened to you is the hardest thing that's ever happened to you. Number two, level up the competition. Look for a group of worthy rivals. Look for a group of worthy rivals. We talked a little bit about this at this past Freedom Fighters Summit. We talked about it at length a couple of months back when I kind of was walking through this on one of the podcast episodes on worthy rivals. This idea of Simon Sinek in his book, The Infinite Game, the idea of the worthy rival. Level up the competition. If you feel like you're at the top of your game and everybody around you is not pushing you, not challenging you, then you need to look for a group of more worthy rivals. You need to look for a group that is going to push you to new heights. Don't get complacent with your competitors. There's always a group that is better than you. There's always other people that are better than you. Go try to get involved with them, right? If you're playing Pee Wee football, that's great. But if you're 32 and you're playing Pee Wee football, that's a problem, right? If you're trying to be the best in basketball, then staying at the high school level, even at a really good high school, is not the place that you need to be. You need to find a group of better competitors to push you further. So the reason that I signed up for the Grindstone 100 was because I knew that there was going to be some amazing runners at this event. The Grindstone 100 is hosted by the UTMB. And for those outside the kind of runner world, the UTMB is the Ultra Trail de Mont Blanc. It's basically that particular race. The UTMB finals is a race that a 100-mile race that goes through France, Switzerland, and Italy, and is basically, through this just gorgeous scenic space in those three countries. You start and end in France. Gorgeous 100-mile race. And it is basically like the Super Bowl of running. From a world perspective, it's like the Super Bowl of running. And UTMB hosts about 50 events around the world in all different countries around the world. They host several in the United States, and the Grindstone 100 is one of those. And because they host it, this race was a kind of qualifier for getting into the UTMB finals. And since it's a qualifier for getting into the UTMB finals, I knew there was going to be some very competitive people at this race. A lot of runners in this race. There was 4 different distances. The 100-mile distance had 300 runners in that particular distance. And that dwarfed either of the other 2 races that I did, either the Daytona. There was less than 100 at the one in Gastonia last year. I mean, it was a massive amount of people at this race. All of the different distances sold out. I mean, it was an amazing space venue. It starts at Natural Chimneys State Park, with the natural chimneys right there in the background. I mean, they have all kinds of vendor canopies and tents. They had a stage with live music. I mean, this was clearly a race that you had seen, that they have done in multiple different spaces all over the world. They had this thing down to a science. It was an event beyond just being an actual competition. The aid stations were amazing. The signage along the course was amazing. I mean, this was a world-class event. And because it was a world-class event, which qualified for the Super Bowl of race events, there was high-quality competitors in there. Just an amazing group of other runners within this particular space. And so, again, as opposed to the kind of more localized race that I was at last year, Beast of the East, which was a blast and amazing, it's like, let's push ourselves to new heights and see what kind of world-class competition looks like. And I'll tell you, world-class competition is unbelievably impressive. But the beauty of seeing and being next to world-class competition is that you are called to greatness. You see what greatness looks like. Don't be afraid of high-quality competitors. High-quality competitors show you a model for leveling up. They show you a model for success. They show you the blueprint to victory, to achieving your goals. Don't be afraid of high quality competitors in everything that you do, in business, as a lawyer in the courtroom, as a parent, as a spouse. Look for other people that are doing it better than you are so that you can emulate them. Find other people that are crushing it at the highest level so that you can go by their example. So number 2, you got to level up the competition. Number 3, belief precedes ability. Number 3, belief precedes ability. If you plan to accomplish big goals, your confidence in achievement must come before you realize the dream. Belief precedes ability. I started off the Freedom Fighter Summit with a talk on endurance, and it doesn't mimic any of these particular episodes. So that was its own unique content on becoming an endurance professional. But one of the things that I had done, and I showed at the Freedom Fighter Summit, one of the things that I had done before the Grindstone 100 was about 3 weeks before the race. I had gone up to Virginia to drop my daughter off at school. On the way back, the Grindstone course was about 20 minutes off the interstate. So I was like, I'm going to go see where this race starts, run a few miles of the course on my way back to Weaverville. And so I stopped off. I ran a few miles along the course, and it was helpful to like kind of visualize where this thing was going to start, where we were going to run. I drove the first few miles of the course that you start out running on the road, and then when it hit the trail, or really a gravel road, when it hit the gravel road and you could no longer get there by vehicle, I went and ran that section for about a 5 mile little shakeout run there on the or training run there on the beginning of the course. And as I was coming back nearing the van, I recorded a little video where I basically said, I'm right here doing this kind of training run on the space where I'm going to be in about 3 weeks. I'll be nearing the finish line. And when I come through here again, I'm going to be in first place, baby. Recorded a little video. And obviously that video was delusional because I actually finished in 19th place. Still pretty proud of that finish given the level of competition that was involved in the race. But delusional in terms of believing I was going to be in first place. And it was in jest that I said that, but there was definitely a little bit of honesty in that joke. Because I did think it's possible in some scenario where everything goes perfect on my end, and for the competitors that are top level that I'm going up against, something goes wildly wrong over the course of 100 miles. That can definitely happen. It's definitely possible that I could be near the top when I cross the finish line. And I think part of the delusion is okay, because you have to imagine yourself accomplishing your goals. You have to visualize success. All the greats talk about this, how much they visualize success, how much they visualize taking that 20-foot jumper as the buzzer is going off, how they visualize that ball going through the net, leaving their hands, traveling through the air, swish, hitting the net, and the buzzer goes off. Literally thinking about that, literally picturing how victory is going to be achieved. Belief precedes ability. You have to believe that you are capable of accomplishing great things. If you want to accomplish great things, you have to imagine yourself doing that before you actually do it, before you have the ability to do it. You have to visualize it. You have to see it. So number 3, belief precedes ability. Number 4, this is kind of a long one and sounds a little bit funky, but you're going to get it when we go through this. A 2-point conversion for the W versus kicking the extra point to tie. Which one are you going for? 2-point conversion for the win or kicking the extra point to tie? Now, ultimately, before we get too deep into this one, I want you to know that both are fine, but you have to know what you're playing for. You're playing for overtime and to kind of push this thing. Are you playing it safe or are you playing for the win? You're going to take a low risk for the win. If you want to win, there are times that you need to take calculated risks in order to achieve victory. Say that again. If you want to win, you're going to have to take some risks. Victory is not for the faint of heart. Victory is not for those playing it safe. So the first time I started a 100-mile race, this was the first time I started a 100-mile race where I was expecting to finish. When I did the Daytona 100 a couple years back, it was a total guessing game what was going to happen after mile 30. Longest I'd run before that was 32 miles. By mile 35, it's like we are in uncharted waters. When I did the Beast of the East back in December of last year, never done, anything with that much elevation gain, especially over that type of distance. And again, it's like I had some goals for what I wanted to do time-wise finishing. But again, the goal was, hey, let's finish this race. Big picture goal was let's finish this race because I don't even know if I can. This was the first time that I fully expected to finish. And there was plenty of runners out there whose goal was to cross the finish line before the cutoff time. They weren't racing against anybody else on the course. They were doing this in order to complete the 100-mile distance, in order to accomplish the mission of finishing within the cutoff time. But for me going into this race, like I said, the goal was to be competitive. It wasn't just to finish. And so I wasn't going to play it safe because I knew that other people that are trying to go out and place, podium, get a top 5 finish, they're not playing to cross the finish line ultimately. They're going out to win. That is their goal. And so in this race, unlike the Daytona 100, unlike the Beast of the East 100, I went out hot. I went out hot. By the third aid station, we had done a significant climb. We went up a 3,000-foot climb over a 6-mile period, I believe, between the second and third aid station, and I was cranking up that mountain, just cranking. It was dark by that point, headlamp on, and I was passing a lot of people, and all the runners at that point were in the 100-mile distance. I must have passed probably 20 people on the way up that mountain. And when I got into the third aid station, I was in 8th place. My thought process for going out hot in this race, I went out hot, pretty hot from the start line, was I want to get ahead of a lot of runners so that as we're going into the early aid stations, I'm not like waiting behind other people to have my water bottles filled up. I'm not waiting behind other people in order to get food. If I need some sort of medical attention, I'm not waiting on that. I want to be at the front of the pack so I can get in, get out, and move on. And then after we kind of get into, mile 20 and things have significantly thinned out in terms of where everybody is, then I'll kind of take it a little bit more at my own pace. But I went out hot, and looking back, probably went out too hot because I went out cranking, but that was definitely intentional. Ultimately, after running through the night, the early morning hours coming up, hit Cold Springs Aid Station at the furthest point from the start line at mile 60, probably around like 8 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, the Saturday after the race had started, and I was still in the top 10. Dropped off quite a few spots in that last 45 miles, almost 10 spots into the negative after leaving Cold Springs at mile 60. But again, the intention was to go out hot. And I went out with that kind of risk mindset of I know that I am going to be kind of like pushing the bodily limit of this, and maybe I would have finished faster had I not gone out that hot, but I was going out with the intent of being competitive to victory, not just with the intent of finishing. So are you in it to win it? In business, in the law, are you in it to win it, or are you in it to keep playing? Simon Sinek talks about in the infinite game, there's no winning or losing. there's only ahead and behind. The goal isn't to win, it's to keep playing, right? And so I think that there's moments where that's true in business. And I think there's moments where that is real, because there is, it's not a finite game like a race is finite. But there are things within the practice of law, games within the practice of law, within business that are finite. If you think about a trial, that's a win or lose situation. You either get a guilty verdict or a not guilty verdict. It's win or lose. Are you in it to win it, or are you in it for just kind of the next trial? Even though your business isn't going to be there for any finite period of time, kind of in it to keep playing, you can win the next quarter. You can hit whatever goals, KPIs, whatever rocks that you have for your next quarter. You can hit those or you don't. You either accomplished them or you didn't. So I think that there are finite goals within the infinite game of business that are important to go after and attack. So you see coaches that are faced with the decision at the end of the game. They're down by 7. Their team, with just seconds left on the clock, nudges it over the goal line. Now they're down by 1. They can go for the 2-point conversion for ultimate victory. If they make the 2-point conversion, they win. If they fail at the 2-point conversion, they lose. So win or lose if you go for the 2-point conversion. Or you can play it safe, kick the extra point, and put it into overtime. And sometimes it's like putting it into overtime makes the most sense because that's the safe play. But what if you don't get the ball first in overtime? What if you lose the coin toss? What if you lose in overtime? It doesn't feel as much like that was your fault as the coach because your team doesn't perform on the field in overtime. But if you gone for that 2-point conversion and made it, you guys would have won the game. Sometimes you have to go for the W. So you're playing for the 2-point conversion, you're playing for the extra point. Number 5, don't overbook yourself or your team. Don't overbook yourself or your team. If you have a monumental task, a monumental goal ahead of you, don't go into that goal physically taxed or mentally burnt out. So there was a lot going on at the time of this Grindstone 100 race, and most of it was planned. So we moved from our home in Weaverville to the opposite side of the state at the beginning of September. Our kids were starting at a new school. We were getting settled in. We were unpacking, trying to get everything set up in our new house. We were trying to get our old house in Weaverville set up for Airbnb, and that required a lot of coordination and cleaning. And that was just a couple of weeks before the beginning of this race. And then the weekend after this race was the Freedom Fighter Summit, something that I had spent months of time planning and preparing for, hours and hours a week getting ready for. It was a lot of stress getting ready for that summit. So this was just a week before that, couple weeks after big move, week before the Freedom Fighter Summit. And in all honesty, it's probably bad timing to schedule a endurance race of this nature. Part of my thought process was, and obviously I wanted to use this race in the Freedom Fighter Summit, which I did, and I think there was a lot of great lessons to pass along at that event. But I came into this race stressed, feeling a lot of the stress of that recent move, a lot of anxiety and worry about freedom fighters the next week. What if I fall? What if I get hurt? And somehow the summit falls through because of that. Didn't feel like everything was already prepped and ready. And so I was going in like, man, I've got this race. I'm going to have to finish. kind of get myself mentally back and ready by Monday so I can kind of finalize all of these things for Freedom Fighters Week. It was a lot of stress. And not only was it a lot of stress on me, but it really put a lot of pressure on my family and particularly my wife. She was very busy getting everything unpacked and setting up everything in our new house here in North Topsail Beach, putting a lot of the planning into place for our house to be ready for Airbnb in Weaverville, getting all of the kids' school items set up. I mean, it was a lot of things going on in life. And in the midst of this, it's like, hey, on a Thursday afternoon, we need to drive 6.5 hours up to Virginia, check into an Airbnb. Then you've got to like go all over Kingdom Come on back roads that you're not aware of with zero cell reception and figure out how to like support me as a crew member. It was just a ton of poorly planned and poorly timed logistics. And to my wife and my family's credit, they stepped up and were an amazing support crew throughout the race. But it was a lot to ask. And it was bad timing. And so, in your own business, if you have a team that is taxed, let's say that you've had somebody that has recently left your team and now everybody else is having to pull that teammate's weight, or somebody has had 3 big cases thrown on top of their desk as a paralegal or as a new attorney, and they're sinking their teeth into that, and then all of a sudden you say, hey, you know what, we're gonna change the way that we do our systems, or we're actually going to push into this new practice area, and I need you to read these 3 manuals and go to, these 12 hours of CLE in order to start getting ready for this new practice. If you intentionally put tasks on your team's plate when they are already overwhelmed, you are setting yourself up for somebody leaving your team. You're setting yourself up for uh, stressful conversations. You're setting up your team for backlash. I mean, it's important to be intentional about when you are making a withdrawal from your team's bank, from the emotional bank of your team. Don't overbook yourself. Don't overtax your team, or you're going to lead everyone, including you, to burnout. So if you want to avoid burnout, don't overbook yourself. Number 6, the power of positivity. Power of positivity. Speak life into your mind and into the world. So let's talk about now the man of the hour, my brother, Jeremy Minnick. Because Jeremy was my pacer for the last 33 plus miles of the Grindstone 100 and just came through in a monumental way. For 33 miles, Jeremy went into this race with pretty much zero training. Now he's done some running over the past few years off and on. So it's not like Jeremy's completely out of shape. He's in great shape. He's playing basketball all the time. He's doing weight training and running some. But leading up to this, his like practice runs were mostly on flat sidewalk and road in his area because that's where he had time to go train. But he wasn't doing like trail runs with elevation gain, and there wasn't a ton of lead up time to this. I only asked him to be my pacer a month and a half, I think, before the race. Like there just was not much time given to get prepped. And the prep that he did, which was best he could do schedule wise, was not a ton. And he came through in a massive way. 33 miles up and down. We're talking major mountains, down mountains. I mean, this was like significant elevation gain. Longest run of his life, I mean, just like totally came through. And at this point, I'm pretty dead when Jeremy met up with me. Pretty dead. So not giving a lot of conversation on my end. And Jeremy just spent the entire time that he ran with me, which was 10 hours. I mean, it had to have been, 10-hour time frame uh, that he was with me, speaking positive words, having a one-sided conversation, praying, as we're going to talk about in a second. But the positive words was just unbelievably necessary and powerful. It's just crazy to think about for, 8 to 10 hour period of time, just saying positive things to somebody. Positivity, positivity, encouragement. The mind is a sponge. And if you fill the mind with water, then you're filling it with life. But you can also fill that sponge with poison water, whatever other kind of like poisoned elixir that you can imagine, and it'll soak that up as well. And if you're telling yourself, or if other people are telling you constantly, you're not going to be able to do this, you're not going to be able to finish, you suck. Look at you. You're losing ground. People are passing you. Why didn't you prepare better for this? Why didn't you put more time in? If you're telling yourself these negative thoughts, or somebody else, worse, but if somebody else is telling you these negative things, you're in big trouble. But if you have somebody around you that is like, man, you're going to finish this. We're going to get this done. You're looking great. You're looking strong. Your form is good. You're keeping after it. Great job. I mean, it was just constant positivity that Jeremy was speaking out loud. And it made a huge difference in terms of how that last 33 miles went. At the worst part of the race, at the end of the race, already 70 plus miles deep into the race, when Jeremy joined up with me, that last 33 miles was the best mileage of the race. And it was because of the positivity that Jeremy brought. You have to create a culture of positivity. You have to bring people onto your team that are speaking positivity, that are saying, we're going to get this done. We're going to get through this. We're going to figure this out, as opposed to saying, it can't be done. Things have gone to hell. I told you this would happen. You suck as a leader. This organization stinks. Susie's not pulling her weight. All whatever it is that people are speaking. If you don't have a culture of positivity, you are in real trouble. And if you have plans to do big things and you don't have people around you that are saying, you can do it, I believe in you, it is going to be much more difficult, not impossible, but much more difficult to accomplish those things. When you have somebody that is telling you you're going to make it happen, it is much more likely that it will happen. On one of the past episodes on running, I've talked about the power of speaking your goals into existence, because it gives life to those. When other people are speaking your goals into existence, they're saying, you're going to do this. You're going to finish this race. You're looking great. You're strong. You also believe that. So there's power in speaking it to yourself, but there's even greater power when other people are saying it, and you buy into that. Man, I'm ready to rock and roll right now. I might look like I am a disaster and everything's gone off the rails, and my time, my pace per mile is massively taking a nosedive, and we're about to hike up 3,000 foot in the next 8 miles. And all those things can fester, or it can be like, hey, we're going to go tackle this thing. Let's go get after it. Jeremy brought the positivity, great power in that. Number 7, the power of prayer. Gratitude and a focus on others in times of trial is a recipe for success. Gratitude and focus on others in times of trial is a recipe for success. Beyond just the positivity, Jeremy also brought the power of prayer. And he spent multiple hours during the time that he was pacing me in out loud prayer, verbalized, audible prayer. And it was so powerful. He was praying for me, he was praying for members of my family. It was very like heartfelt and touching and beautiful. And just thinking about other people again in those late miles was so powerful. You'll hear Christians sometimes say, offer it up. You know, if you're going through a difficult time or if you're suffering, they'll say, you know, something to offer up or you should offer it up. And this felt like a real opportunity to offer up the suffering through prayer to others. God, use this suffering for whatever it can do for these other people in my life for some greater good. It's wild when you are going through tough spots because the brain is very self-focused. It wants to preserve you. So it gets very concerned about how this is impacting you, and the brain starts to shut off. It starts to say, you really pushing things too far. You should take care of yourself and slow down. But when you start to use this suffering for others, or even thinking about the tough circumstances that others are facing, the brain opens up. And instead of shutting off, it says, I feel like I can go a little bit further to do something for this other person. You can definitely see this in kind of the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. People that have just literally gone through a war zone are out helping their neighbors dig out mud, get food and water, get people medical care. The people that are other focused are able to get through these difficult spots in such a different and more powerful and heroic way because they're not selfish. They're not self-consumed. They're not in this closed, dark space of their own brain and figuring out how they're going to survive. It's how can I help other people in this moment? There's also a lot of prayers of gratitude that Jeremy offered up. The mindset like God is good all the time. All the time, God is good. You read the Psalms, you read other books in the Bible, and people are going through some pretty dark stuff in certain passages of the Bible. And yet you'll often hear them giving this kind of final blessing. You know, God, even in these dark, dark moments, even in this exile, in captivity, in prison, as I face death through these moments of martyrdom, God is good. And he is the one that is orchestrating the show. You see people that have very little, you know, in other countries or people that are living in poverty that have a heart of gratitude and they just seem so much happier than people that seemingly from the outside have it all because they're recognizing the blessings in their life. And Jeremy was just superb at bringing out the blessings of the moment, of the day, of the opportunity to be out running through the gorgeous landscape that we are running through. Gratitude is a recipe for success. Focusing on others during difficult times is the recipe for success. So, number 7, the power of prayer. Number 8, keep moving forward. If you're stuck in a difficult situation, the way out is movement. Keep moving forward. If you stay where you are, your circumstances are not going to improve. If you are stuck and you don't go anywhere else, you're going to stay stuck. There's the old saying, if nothing changes, then nothing changes. You can, and I probably did this a little too much in the later stages of the race, just sitting in some aid stations where it's like, feels good to sit in that aid station, but you're not getting any closer to the finish line. It's going to hurt to get back up. It's going to hurt to start moving again. But until you do that, you're not getting any closer to the finish line. Jeremy's son, Henry, asked me a few months back, how do you run 100 miles? We were at the beach and we were talking about this race coming up. And my nephew said, how do you run 100 miles? And I answered him, one step at a time. One step at a time. And that's the reality of the situation. When you're going through difficult moments, when you're trying to implement a new system at your law firm, when you are just getting into a new case with 100 pages of discovery or 1,000 pages of discovery, or you've got some new person that's starting at your firm and you're trying to figure out, how am I going to get this person trained? You got to keep moving forward one step at a time, right? Love this quote from Rocky Balboa. This is one of my favorites. My dad always says this, and sometimes gets it right, sometimes butchers it, but it's definitely like a shared family favorite quote. And this is Rocky Balboa talking to his son. He says, let me tell you something you already know. The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place. And I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. You, me, or nobody is going to hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward, how much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. Love that quote. That's how winning is done. It's not about how hard you can hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. When you are pushed to the limit and you can keep moving forward, it is so powerful. And it's the way to get through difficult circumstances, to get through tragedy, to deal with a loss. If you stay where you're at and you are stuck, you're going to remain stuck. Even if you're moving inches over the period of hours, you're moving in a different direction. You're moving away from being stuck. So whatever it is, business, life, place where you are stuck mentally, physically, emotionally, keep moving forward. Number 9, relish the gnarly. Relish it. Relish the gnarly. If you go searching for a challenge, be prepared for the moment when you have your back up against the proverbial wall. Why do you do a 100-mile race? Because it's a damn hard thing to do, right? Relish the gnarly. Don't go do a 100-mile race and then be like shocked when it's challenging and it hurts and it's painful and you're bleeding. Relish the gnarly. I did a similar reflection after the Beast of the East, because at the end of the Beast of the East, with like 10 miles out, my friend James and I were running together. He was pacing me, and we went over the top of Kings Mountain through just the absolute pouring rain. I mean, it was like knee deep in place rain, just absolutely coming down. It was dark. We had headlamps on, but you could barely see. You couldn't make out where the next markers were. I mean, we were moving at like a 20-minute per mile pace. I mean, it was just a mess. And one of the runners passed us and looked over and he said, "Yo, this is fucking gnarly." And he was right. I mean, it was gnarly. And you have to, at times in life, when you are going through something that is gnarly, be able to take a step back and be like, man, this is gnarly. Nobody would want to be here right now. This is insane. And man, did the Grindstone 100 live up to this at the end of the race. All race long, beautiful weather, sunshine, gorgeous. Jeremy was reflecting on how beautiful things were. And about 10 miles out from the finish line, you can start to hear the thunder off in the distance. You can start to hear the thunder off in the distance, and it starts to rain. As we're coming into the last aid station, it is pouring thunder, lightning everywhere. I mean, the thunder sounded like a cannon. I mean, it was wild how that thunder and lightning sounded. I mean, it's so dark outside because of the rain. It was closing in on dusk. Wasn't quite dusk yet, so it's still a little bit light outside, but the clouds were just, I mean, it made it look like nighttime. I mean, that lightning was wild. The thunder was unbelievably loud. It was hailing. And we came into that last aid station and kind of sat there for a few moments through a pretty gnarly section of storm. And we're kind of like, do we keep moving or do we stay here? Jeremy was kind of wondering, like, can I make it to the finish line? I was, kind of wondering, like, how long can I sit here? My body temperature was all out of whack from the running. And I was like, how long can I sit here without basically like developing hypothermia? So ultimately he decided I'm going to go for it. I was like, I got to get out of here. I can't stay here. I mean, my teeth were chattering. I mean, I was freezing, and this was not like a cold day. It was just like my body temperature at that point in the race was just totally out of whack. And so we take off, and that rain is coming down hard. And both coming into that aid station and sitting there in it and moving out, it was like, this is a great way to end the race. Wouldn't want it any other way. Grateful that it was mental weather. I mean, it's mental weather. Hail, thunder, rain. Who would want it any different? Because this is what you signed up for. This was the moment that you've been waiting for. Again, if you're going to do hard things, here at mile 99.5 into a 105-mile race, who doesn't want it to just be totally a mess? You got to relish the gnarly, especially when you voluntarily signed up for something hard. Relish the gnarly, relish the moment to let your mind get calloused even more. Let's get wet. Let's get miserable. Let's get scared because it was kind of scary out there with that lightning. I'm not going to lie. Relish the gnarly. Because when you, again, get put in a situation that you didn't sign up for and the gnarly happens, you'll be better prepared for it, as we started out the episode talking about. So don't let the gnarly go to waste. Soak it in. Number 10, the other thing you should soak in is beautiful moments. Soak in the beautiful moments. Don't miss out on the beauty that life has to offer you because you're focused on the pain. Again, these late parts of the run, the first hour and a half of the run was in daylight, and then it was about 10 hours of darkness. And there was still some beauty in the darkness, but you can't see very much. So really about 8 o'clock Saturday morning, as I was coming down like out of this like rocky section that was just a rough section of racing, and came down into the aid station there at mile 60, was when the lights, the sky started to light up. You could see the trees and the views. And as we were coming up one mountain peak, probably about 15 miles out, 10 miles out from the finish, Jeremy's like, when we get to the top of this mountain, we're just going to stop and soak it in for a minute. So we're hiking. I mean, we're going up a steep climb. We get to the top, and I mean, the view is just glorious. Just glorious. I mean, it was amazingly beautiful. And as you're soaking that in, again, I think it's so easy in the hard moments to be like, oh man, this just sucks. I mean, I can't wait for this stupid race to be over. I don't know why I signed up for this thing. Like, man, I don't know why I thought running 100 miles would be good. You'd think I learned my lesson after the first two. I mean, you can get in that negative mental hell. I mean, I was going to say negative mental health space, but really negative mental hell is probably a better way to describe it. And instead, when you're focused on soaking in the beauty that is around you, you can avoid missing out on those amazing experiences. So don't miss out. Soak in the beauty around you. As we left out of that aid station at Lick Run Road, mile 99.5, we had about 2 miles on a gravel road. And by the time we hit the paved road, which is like the last 3 or 4 miles heading in to the finish line at Natural Chimney State Park, sun came back out, and it was just a glorious last few miles running down next to these just beautiful cornfields, amazing Northern Virginia farmland. I mean, it was just like an epic, there's these beautiful barns. The water from the rain was like glistening off of these cornfields. The sun was setting. It was just gorgeous. Jeremy was leading a rosary, as we are saying, coming in during these final miles. And it was like, this is just so unbelievably beautiful. And again, those could have been kind of the miles of suck of, gosh, I'm almost there. I just got across the finish line. And again, those were the best miles of the race, those last few miles, soaking up that beauty, having just gone through this amazing journey, partially on my own, partially with Jeremy going through this amazing personal journey on his end and sharing those last few miles. It was just an epic moment. Soak in those beautiful moments, even in the midst of hardship. Oftentimes, we are given these moments of reprieve. We are given these moments of beauty. And if we're not aware, we are going to miss out on the beauty that life has to offer us. Don't miss out on it. So number 10, soak in beautiful moments. And finally, here's our bonus point for life and business lessons from the 100-mile Grindstone run. Bonus, develop a championship routine. Develop a championship routine. I heard this quote by Sally McRae recently when she was on a podcast with Nick Bear. She said, "You shouldn't wait until you're a champion to act like one." You shouldn't wait until you're a champion to act like one. Why is that? Why? Because actions become habits, and the right habits are the roadmap to success. Actions become habits, and habits are the roadmap to success. You shouldn't wait until you're a champion to act like one. You hear all the time people say, you have to have a championship mindset, or this player had a champion mindset. And I agree with that. Like, you have to have a champion mindset, but you also need a championship or a champion routine. You need a champion routine. Mindset is great, but actions are what drive our thoughts into reality. Actions are the next step that keep moving forward. If you act like a champion, it is highly probable that you'll turn into a champion. This is why it's important to step back from the things that we are engaged in, the things that we are doing. You always hear people say you need to work on your business instead of in it. Why is that? Because there is a championship routine that is necessary to winning in business. And so we have to step back and say, are the things that we're doing in business working, or are they not? Do we need to tweak the routine? Is the routine getting us to where we need to be? Parents always have this like idea of, you need the right bedtime routine. Why is that important? Because you don't want to have a war with your children every night. So you've got to step back sometimes and say, how could we make this better? We've done this recently in our house with our morning routine and getting the kids ready for school because it felt like for a while that we were having a war trying to get our kids to get their clothes, brush their teeth. And so my wife and I were like, we can just remain pissed about this all the time, or we can step back and think about how we can improve the circumstances and situation. How can we make this better? You've got to create a champion routine, a championship routine. The Patriots, you always talk about, like you hear about their culture of they do things a certain way. The Patriots were successful because they had a lot of motivational speeches. The Patriots were successful, the best in the league at the time, because they had great routines. They had built habits of success. They had built a championship culture. What did that mean? They were acting like champions even before they became champions. Whatever you're doing, whether it's trying to become a better trial lawyer in the courtroom, whether you're trying to take your business to the next level, you're trying to be a better spouse, you're trying to be a better follower of the Lord, you're trying to be a better parent, whatever it might be, you have to take a step back and say, are my routines in this area of my life championship level routines? Are they going to get me victory, or are they going to bring me to mediocrity or worse, defeat? Are my routines working for me? And I think in a lot of areas in my life recently, I've taken a step back and looked and said, you don't have a championship routine in this area in your life. You're going to have to tweak the routine in order to be a champion. So, this was a quote that I thought about a lot going into this race. I heard it several months before the race. It was something that really stuck with me. And again, I think in some ways I had some championship mentality and actions and routines going in. And in a lot of ways, I didn't. A lot of ways, I did not. If you want to be a champion, you shouldn't wait to act like one. Got to act like one before you get it. So there is your bonus point. 10 ways plus a bonus to improve in life, in law, in business, based on lessons learned from the Grindstone 100. I hope this episode has been helpful, and I look forward to concluding our endurance series next time.